The fish died first. That was how Sola learned to judge danger. Back on her home world, the shallow pools near her colony always had small fish. When something was wrong, when a predator was close, when the water was about to turn bad, the fish stopped moving. Not because they were calm, because they were waiting. She thought about those fish the first time she saw the human. His name was on the cohort board. Rail Darren. Species, human. Origin, New Carthage. His file photo showed a plain face. Brown skin, dark eyes that gave nothing away. He was not tall, not wide. By Gorvathi standards, by almost any standard in the Galactic Union Academy, he looked like someone who had arrived at the wrong building. Solo watched him from across the mess hall on the third day of the new semester. He was sitting alone at the far end of a long table, tray of food untouched in front of him, doing nothing. No datapad, no headset. He was just sitting there looking at the room. Slowly, table by table, exit by exit. The way you look at a place when you're deciding how to move through it if things go badly. He had been sitting like that for almost 40 minutes. Sola had compound eyes. She could track multiple points of movement at once. And what she noticed, that the others did not, was that Rail's gaze returned to one spot more than any other. The large table in the center of the hall. The table where Brick's Saturday Bricks was Gorvathi. 2.5 meters of scaled muscle with a jaw that could crush hull plating. He was the top-ranked physical cadet in the cohort, and he knew it the way a sun knows it is bright. Not with pride exactly, just with the simple certainty that smaller things orbit around it, that he was loud. His friends were loud. His laughter filled the room, and everyone in the room adjusted to it. The way water adjusts to a stone dropped into it. Bricks noticed Rail around the time Sola expected he would. He noticed because Rail was still. And Bricks, like most predator-line species, was drawn to stillness the wrong way. Not with caution, with curiosity. The kind that ends things. He crossed the mess hall slowly, already smiling. His two usual companions followed. The room did not go quiet because nothing had happened yet, but some people looked up. They had seen this walk before. Bricks stopped at Rail's table. He looked down at the human the way you look at something that wandered into a space it does not understand. "You are in my seat," Bricks said. Rail looked up at him. No hitty. He looked at Bricks the way he had been looking at the room, measuring. Then he looked back down at his tray. "There are 40 open seats," Rail said. His voice was flat, not scared, not aggressive, just flat. That Bricks' smile widened. He reached down and picked up Rail's tray with one hand and moved it to an empty table 3 meters away. Food slid. The drink spilled. Bricks sat down in Rail's spot, said something in Gorvathi to his companions, and they laughed. Rail stood up. He walked to the new table where his tray had been dropped. He sat down. He began eating what had not spilled. That was all, in no words. No stare. No tension in his shoulders. He just ate. Sola watched this and felt something she could not immediately name. It was not relief. It was not disappointment. It was closer to the feeling she got reading about deep ocean creatures. The ones that lived in total darkness and had evolved into shapes that made no sense until you understood the pressure they lived under. She pulled out her datapad and looked up Rail Darren. His academic scores were high. Engineering, tactical analysis, xenobiology. Not the highest in the cohort, but consistently in the upper range. His physical assessment scores were low, in the bottom quarter. Weight and muscle mass registered as below average for a human male, which was already below average for most enrolled species. She searched New Carthage next. It was an industrial city on Earth's northern continent. Dense. Old. The file described it in standard Union language as an area of high population concentration with elevated socioeconomic disparity. The footnotes used words like conflict-prone and resource-contested. She searched those terms in plain language. The results were less clean. Forum posts from union aid workers. Field reports from the one brief period the union had tried to set up an outreach office there before abandoning it. A medical record summary that noted humans from New Carthage had measurably higher scar tissue density on average than humans from other regions. Sola put the datapad down. Across the mess hall, Bricks was still laughing. Rail was still eating. The room had moved on. No one else seemed to think anything had happened. But Sola kept watching the human that he finished his meal without looking back at Bricks once. He stacked his tray. He walked to the hall exit at an unhurried pace. Before he passed through the door, he paused for just a moment, and without turning his head, his gaze swept the room one more time. Then he was gone. Sola sat still for a long time after that. She thought about the fish again, about how the ones that survived were never the biggest. They were the ones that knew exactly how long to be patient. The ones that understood that waiting was not the same as doing nothing. She wondered if Brix understood the difference. She suspected he was about to find out. By the second week, it had become a routine, not a loud one. Brix was smarter than he appeared. He did not make scenes. He made frictions. Small, daily, deniable frictions that added up into a weight no one else could easily see, the shoulder hit in the corridor that sent Rail's data pad skidding. Brix kept walking, did not look back, said nothing. Just a careless step. An accident. Could not be proven otherwise. A comment in tactical theory when the instructor asked the cohort to cite historical examples of successful asymmetric warfare. Brix leaned toward his companion and said just loud enough that some species never evolved past hiding in holes and calling a strategy. A few cadets laughed. Rail did not react. A food tray incident again, different day, same result. And each time, Rail absorbed it and moved on. No report filed. No confrontation sought. He walked the same corridors, sat in the same classes, ate in the same mess hall. He did not shrink his world to avoid Brix. He simply moved through it like water moves around a stone, without comment, without detour, without rage. The cohort noticed. The interpretation was nearly universal. The human was afraid. Wynn, the other human cadet, said nothing. Sola saw her look at Rail, once with something complicated in her expression, then look away fast. She had made her calculation. Proximity to the target made you a target. She sat with two Theran cadets now, on the far side of the room from Rail. Sola did not sit with Wynn. She had not spoken to Rail yet, but she had started sitting where she could see him. What she noticed, that the others did not, was that Rail was paying attention to everything. He sat in the second row in every class, not the back. He asked careful questions, not many, but the kind that made instructors pause before answering. He tracked the schedule of every training room in the building and used the empty ones at odd hours. She knew this because she had checked the booking logs that he was in the smallest training room on sub-level 4 every night between the 3rd and 5th rest cycle hours. Always alone. Never for long enough to show up in supervised activity reports that, on the 9th night, she could not stop herself. She stood outside the room and looked through the narrow observation slit in the door. What she saw made her go very still. Rail was doing a conditioning circuit. That was the plain word for it. But there was nothing plain about what it looked like. He moved from station to station without stopping, without sound. Floor exercises that used his own weight against himself. Then wall endurance sets. Then slow, controlled breathing holds that her biology textbook listed as a human respiratory stress technique used by pre-industrial deep-sea workers. He had been doing this for at least an hour. She pulled up the biometric data she had collected on Rail from their shared physical assessments. His resting heart rate was lower than any other human on file. His pain threshold scores, the ones recorded when the Academy ran its intake assessments, were in the top 2% of all enrolled species. She read that number twice. Top 2%. Not of humans, of all enrolled species. The intake notes said the result was likely a data error. She had believed that when she first read it. She did not believe it now. In tactical theory the next afternoon, the instructor announced the first formal combat simulation pairings. A randomized bracket. Rail was matched with a mid-rank Gorvathi named Doss. Not Brix, but close enough in build and method that the cohort understood the implication. The simulation chamber was a gray room with padded walls and impact sensors. Instructors watched from above. The pairings were not supposed to be entertainment, but the cohort watched anyway. Doss went at Rail hard from the first second. Standard Gorvathi method. Overwhelm fast. End it before the opponent adapts. The first strike connected. Then the second. Rail moved wrong, or seemed to, taking a shoulder hit that threw him into the wall. He slid down. Got up. Doss hit him again. He got up again. This continued for 4 minutes. At the end of it, Rail was on the floor, and the session was called. His score was low. His injury markers were high. The cohort recorded it with the quiet satisfaction of a prediction confirmed. Brix smiled at his table. Sola did not watch Brix. She watched instructor Dorvac. Dorvac was an old Krellian with a face like weathered rock. He ran combat assessment with the warmth of a closed door. He did not react to cadets winning. He did not react to cadets losing. He stood at his data station and watched the biometric feeds with the expression of someone reading a language only they could fully understand. After the rail session, he did not write in his evaluation pad like he normally did. He pulled up the session replay and watched it again. Then a third time. His expression did not change. But he saved the files separately in a folder Sola had never seen him use before. She filed it away the same way she filed everything now. Back in her bunk that night, she wrote one line in her personal log. The human does not get back up because he is too stubborn to quit. She paused. Then she deleted it and wrote the correct version that he gets back up because he already knew he was going to. Every single time. She thought about what that meant in a real fight against someone who was used to winning the moment the other person decided it was over. She thought Brix was going to find out what it meant very soon. The bracket went up on a Tuesday. Rail versus Brix. Combat assessment. Live sparring rotation. End of the third week. Nobody said anything out loud. But by midday, everyone in the cohort knew, and by evening, the training halls had emptied early as cadets went back to their bunks to talk about it, where instructors could not hear them. The general opinion settled fast. It was going to be short. It was going to be bad. The only real debate was whether Dorvac would stop it before Rail got seriously hurt. Sola did not join any of those conversations. She sat in the observation deck above the combat chamber the morning before the match and watched Rail doing his solo session in the sublevel room below through the remote feed she had quietly linked to her datapad. He was not doing anything different. Same circuit, same silence, same complete absence of panic. She realized she was the only one in the cohort who had been watching him long enough to understand that. The match was scheduled for the third training block. When the time came, the chamber filled up in a way it normally did not. Technically, it was a supervised assessment session. Technically, the cadets present were there to observe and learn. In reality, every available body had found a reason to be in or near that room. Brix arrived first. He wore his assessment gear loosely, like a formality. He stretched with the casual ease of someone who was not preparing for a threat. He talked to his companions and laughed once, though the room was not quiet enough for anyone to hear what he said. Rail came in without company. He checked his wrist sensors, adjusted his shoulder padding, and stood on his side of the mat. He did not look at Brix. He looked at the floor in front of him, and his eyes moved in the way Sola had learned to recognize, measuring, calculating distance, angles. Wait, Dorvac stood at the front of the room. He said the standard opening words about conduct and scoring and called for the match to begin. Brix moved immediately, fast for something that large. He closed the distance in 2 strides and led with a straight strike aimed at Rail's chest. The kind of opening move that had ended every match Brix had been in since his first semester. Fast and hard and aimed at center mass, where there was no smart angle to avoid it. Rail moved, not out of the way, slightly to the side, enough that the strike hit his shoulder instead of his chest. He turned into it, absorbed it, and kept his footing. Brix reset and came again. Rail moved the same way, a few degrees off the impact line, taking the hit but not all of it, like a wall that tilts with the wind instead of breaking point 3 strikes. 4. The room expected Rail to go down. He did not go down. Sola watched his feet. He was moving in a small backward arc, not retreating, not evading, letting Brix drive forward, controlling where Brix's weight was going. She understood what she was watching before the room did. He was learning the rhythm. How Brix planted his feet before a heavy strike. Which shoulder dropped when he was about to swing left. How long the gap was between combinations. He was not trying to win yet. He was reading. He was reading Brix the same way he had been reading the mess hall on the first day. 6 strikes. 7. Then Rail stopped moving backward. The shift was small enough that most of the room missed it. He settled his weight differently, and when Brix's next combination came, Rail did not absorb it. He stepped inside it. The first counter hit Bricks at the side of the knee. Not a kick, a precise stomp that buckled the joint inward for just a moment, just long enough. The second hit was to the solar plexus. Both hands. Short, tight, everything behind it. The third was to the side of the neck. Open palm. Bricks went down. The room went silent. Not the brief silence of surprise. A longer silence. The kind that happens when a room of people all recalibrate something they thought they understood. Bricks was on his hands and knees. He stayed there for 3 full seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than anyone had ever seen him on the ground. Then he pushed himself up. He looked at Rail. Rail was already back in a neutral stance. Breathing steady. Not performing. Just standing there, ready. Dorvac did not call the match. He watched. What happened next broke the rules of the session. Bricks lunged. Not a technique. Not a scored strike. A lunge, 2 hands out, aimed at Rail's throat. The kind of thing that happened when a dominant animal could not process being beaten cleanly and the brain stopped thinking and started reacting. Rail sidestepped. He caught one of Brix's arms, turned it, and took him to the floor. He dropped a knee across Brix's back, found a joint lock in under 2 seconds, and held it. The joint lock was legal. The lunge was not. Brix could not move. His face was against the mat. The room was completely still. Dorvac said, "Hold." Rail released. He stood up. He stepped back. He did not say anything. He did not look at the crowd. He turned slightly, and Sola saw his face for just a moment before he looked back at the floor. He looked tired. Not from the fight, just tired. The way someone looks when they have done something they did not enjoy doing, but that had to be done. Dorvac wrote something in his evaluation pad. Then he wrote something else. Then he left the room without a word to anyone. Brick sat on the mat for a long time after that. The room slowly emptied around him. No one laughed. No one said much of anything. Some things are so clean and so complete that there is nothing useful to add to them. The complaint was filed before the end of the day. Brick cited 3 techniques he claimed were outside the approved sparring framework. He submitted the filing through official channels with his companions listed as supporting witnesses. It was clean, formal, and the language in it was careful enough that someone had helped him write it. The review board watched the match recording in full. Then they watched the section covering the lunge. Then they dismissed all 3 complaints and issued a formal conduct note against Bricks for the illegal attack. The note went into his permanent file. It took 18 hours from filing to resolution. Sola heard about the result through the cohort network and felt something settle in her chest. She had not been sure the process would work correctly. She was glad it had. The cohort adjusted after that. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a room adjusts to a change in light. People still talked to Bricks. He still sat at the center table. But there was a new space around him. Not physical, just social, a small careful gap that had not been there before. The space around Rail changed too, but differently. Cadets did not crowd him. They did not suddenly befriend him. But they stopped treating the space beside him as empty. In the corridor, they gave him room the way you give room to something you have newly learned to factor into your movements. Not fear. Recalculation that on the second day after the match, Solis sat down across from Rail at breakfast. She did not ask permission. She put her tray down, sat in the chair, and looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "How did you learn to do that?" she asked. "Take that much impact without flinching." Rail considered the question the way he considered most things, without hurry. "Where I grew up," he said, "you got hit or you stayed home. I did not want to stay home. New Carthage. New Carthage." She waited. He seemed to decide she had earned a little more. You learn the difference between a hit that ends things and a hit that just hurts. Most it just hurt. Once you know that, getting hit is less important than what you do right after. Sola filed that away carefully. It was not a fighting philosophy. It was a survival philosophy. The difference mattered. "You were measuring him," she said. "The whole first part of the match. You were not defending. You were reading." Rail looked at her with something that was almost surprise. "Almost." "Yes," he said. "How long did you need?" 6 strikes, he said. He had a pattern. Most people do. They practice one way for long enough, and the body starts doing it without the brain. She thought about that for the rest of the meal. When she stood to leave, she told him she would probably sit here again tomorrow. He said that was fine. That was the beginning of it. That on the third day, when came to find Rail in the corridor outside Tactical Theory, Sola was nearby and did not move away. She told herself it was because she wanted to understand the dynamic between the two humans. That was partly true when stood in front of Rail and said, I should have said something. Well, he was doing that every day. I should have said something. Rail looked at her for a moment. You stayed quiet. That was the right move. Wynn blinked. That is not what I expected you to say. You had no information yet. Rail said, you did not know what I was going to do. Getting yourself targeted on the bet that I would eventually handle, it would have been a bad calculation. You did not owe me anything. Wynn was quiet for a while. Then she said, does it not bother you that no one helped? It would have made it harder, he said. I needed Bricks comfortable. If he felt like there was a coalition against him, he would have been more careful. I needed him to think it was easy. Sola watched Wynn process this. It clearly bothered her in a way she could not easily argue with. We should eat together sometime, Wynn said finally. Rail said sure. That afternoon, Dorvac called Rail to his office. Sola was not there for this part. Rail told her about it later, in the same flat way he told her most things, without drama. Dorvac had not congratulated him. He had sat across from Rail with his hands flat on the desk and said, the galaxy categorizes humans as low threat. That classification is based on first contact data from 70 years ago. 3 internal reviews have updated the estimate. None of those updates have been made public. Rail had said nothing. You are not what you look like, Dorvac continued. That is an asset. It is also a problem, because things that are not what they look like tend to frighten people when the truth comes out. Be careful about when and how the truth comes out. He had then slid a form across the desk. Advanced placement. Combat tactics, next semester. No explanation. He had looked out the window and waited for Rail to take it. Rail took it. Dorvac said, dismissed. And that was the whole conversation. That night, alone in the training room on sublevel 4, Bricks ran the match recording for the 4th time. He had not told anyone he was doing this. He sat on the floor with the projection playing in front of him and watched the moment he hit the ground. Then the moment the lock went on. Then the moment Rail stood up and looked tired instead of triumphant, that he watched it 3 more times. He was trying to find the place where he had made his first mistake. Not the lunge. He knew the lunge was a mistake. The first one. The place where the result had already been decided without him knowing it, that he found it. Eventually, .it was the 4th strike. The moment he had been certain the fight was over and his body had stopped fully thinking, that he sat with that for a long time. The moon had no name in the Union Registry, just a coordinate and a classification. Survivable, with conditions. The conditions were not good. Instructor Dorvac had briefed the cohort the evening before departure. Atmospheric oxygen at 63% of standard. Surface temperature cycling between -20 and +4 over a 30-hour day. Terrain classified as broken, meaning rocks, drops, loose ground, and no flat paths between here and the extraction point 11 kilometers out. They had 4 days. They had their packs. The mission was simple in the way that hard things are always described as simple. Move, survive, extract. The shuttle set them down before first light. Within the first 2 hours, the cohort sorted itself into the shape that pressure always reveals. The larger species, Gorvathi, and the heavy-build Vorn cadets moved fast at the front. The medium species kept pace. The smaller ones fell behind or clustered into groups to share warmth. Sola fell behind. That IT was not weakness. It was biology. Theran exoskeletons were built for warmth. The cold here was a specific kind, dry and relentless, the kind that found the joins between chitinous plates and worked into them like a slow blade. By the end of the 2nd hour, she could feel the front plates of her thorax beginning to contract. By the 3rd hour, there was a faint creak when she moved her upper left arm. She did not say anything about it. Rail fell in a step beside her without being asked. He had been at the back of the main group, not struggling, just moving at a pace that kept him aware of the whole column behind and ahead. He looked at her arm when she moved it wrong, then looked at his pack. Stop a moment, he said. She stopped. He opened a side pouch and took out a flat square of material, she did not recognize. He folded it into a thick strip and pressed it into the joint between her thorax plates and her upper left shoulder. It expanded slightly when it contacted the surface, a thermal insert, the kind deep environment workers used. "I have 4 of those," he said. "I will use them where it matters." She wanted to ask how he had known to pack them. She already knew the answer. He had looked up Theron biology the same way she had looked up human biology. He had done it before the mission because that was how he thought. She said, "Thank you." He nodded, and they kept moving. By the end of the first day, the oxygen was doing what low oxygen always does. It did not hurt immediately. It accumulated. A slowness behind the eyes. Decisions that took a second longer than they should. Species that breathe high oxygen mixtures at home failed at first. The Vorn cadets at the front began to argue about the route, which was unlike them. Vorn were typically disciplined. Sola noted the arguing as a sign. Rail noticed it too. He walked forward through the column without urgency and looked at the disputed route choice for both sides. He said, quietly, that the left path ran lower and would trap cold air at night, and that the right path had a wind break about 800 meters up that would let them rest in better conditions. He showed the 2 Vorn cadets on the terrain map. He did not tell them what to do. He just showed them. They took the right path that IT was better. The windbreak was where he said it would be. They rested on the second day. Bricks went into the ravine. The ground gave way on a downslope that had looked solid. One moment he was moving, the next the edge crumbled and he was gone. The sound of him hitting rock below was not a sound anyone wanted to hear twice. The column stopped. They dropped the light line and called down. Bricks was alive. He answered, but his leg had struck something at the wrong angle and he could not put weight on it. And the ravine walls were too steep and loose to climb without equipment they had not brought for this. There was a conversation. Sola did not like how some of it went. The word beacon came up. Leave him a signal, mark the position, continue to extraction, and send a recovery team back. It was not a cruel suggestion. It was a resource calculation. They had limited time and limited oxygen and a non-mobile casualty in a difficult position. Rail was already unclipping his main line. He tied it to a stable rock anchor, checked the knot twice, and went over the edge. He did not ask for permission. He did not explain his reasoning. He just went that IT took 4 hours. Getting down was the easy part. Bricks was conscious, which helped, but his leg would not take weight, which meant Rail could not simply guide him up. He built a basic harness from line and pack straps. He talked to Bricks the entire time, not to comfort him, just to keep him thinking and moving and cooperating. Short sentences, clear instructions. Bricks followed them. Getting up was slow and loud and required 2 other cadets pulling from the top. Rail was below the whole way, taking Bricks' weight on the steep sections, finding footholds for both of them in rock that did not want to cooperate. When they cleared the top, Bricks sat on the ground and breathed hard. Rail crouched next to him and checked the leg wrapping he had put on below. He adjusted one of the bindings. Then he stood up and looked at the column. "We need to move," he said. "We can rig a carry for the flat sections. He can manage the rough parts with support on both sides." Nobody argued. Bricks said nothing during all of this. Not while they moved. Not at camp that night. He sat apart from his usual companions and ate his ration and looked at the ground. Once, when Sola was watching, Bricks looked across the camp at Rail. Rail was checking the thermal inserts on Sola's exoskeleton joints and talking to Wynn at the same time about the next day's route. He was not looking at Bricks. He was not performing the rescue for anyone. He had done it and moved on to the next problem the same way he had walked away from a stolen food tray on the first day. Without dwelling, without requiring anything back. Bricks watched him for a long time. Then he looked back at the ground, and something in the set of his jaw was different from before, quieter and less certain and more real. Sola filed that too. The end-of-semester ceremonies were held in the main assembly hall, which was large enough to be cold no matter how many people were in it. Rail sat in the back row. He was not called forward for any award. His academic marks were good, but not the highest. His combat assessment scores had been updated after the sparring match with Bricks, but the formal recognition cycle had already closed for the semester. He sat in the back row and watched other cadets collect their rank strips and commendations, and he did not seem to mind. Sola sat beside him. When sat on the other side. 2 days before the ceremony, Commander Zola had sent Rail a meeting request through the official Academy network. No subject line, just a time and a room number. He had told Sola about it over breakfast, matter-of-factly, the way he told her most things. Commander Zola ran Academy oversight from a corner office on the upper level. She was older than Dorvac, which meant she was very old, and she had the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough situations that very few new ones surprised her. She offered Rail a seat and looked at him for a moment before she spoke. She told him that the Union's threat classification for humans had been quietly revised 3 times in the last decade. The first revision came after a study on human pain endurance in extreme environments. The second came after a joint combat exercise where a human unit outperformed projections by a margin that required a recalculation of the assessment model. The third had come from a field report that she did not name. She told him the broader galaxy did not know yet. Not because the information was being hidden, but because species that have been told something is low threat for decades do not update that belief quickly, and a sudden public revision had a history of going badly. Things not understood got mishandled. The Union was being careful. "We are building something," she said. "A specialist program. Cross-species field operations. People who can move between species, understand them, work with them, be underestimated by them when that is useful. People who can find the Theran cadet with a cracked exoskeleton and fix it before it becomes a crisis. People who go into the ravine." She slid a form across the desk. Rail looked at it. He did not pick it up immediately. "You are not the only human candidate," she said, "but you are the one whose file I am looking at right now." He picked up the form. She told him he had 3 days to decide. He thanked her in the plain way he did things and walked out. He found Sola in the study room on the 3rd level and told her about the meeting in full. He told her about the form and what it meant. Early placement, specialized track, likely a long posting away from the standard academy progression. Sola listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You want my opinion," she said. "I want to know what you think. Those are the same thing." She turned one of her middle arms over, the habit she had when she was working through something. "You would be a fool to refuse it," she said. "But you already know that. So the real question is something else." He nodded. "You want to know if the people you trust know where you are going?" she said. He was quiet for a second. "Yes, I know," she said. "When will want to know?" "Tell her. Dorvac already knows, or he will know before you file the form." She paused. "And the other one?" Rail looked at her. He did not need to ask who she meant. Brix came to find Rail on the last evening before the ceremony. He walked without his usual companions, which was noticeable, and he moved with the careful step of someone whose leg had only recently been cleared for full use. He stood in front of Rail in the corridor outside the common room. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something in Gorvathi. Low, short, about 8 syllables. Sola was standing close enough to hear. Her translation came a second later, processed through her secondary auditory system. The phrase was formal Gorvathi, old register. It translated roughly as, "I misjudged the ground beneath my feet," that "it" was not an apology. The Gorvathi word structure did not have a clean equivalent for apology in this register. It was something adjacent and in some ways more costly. It was an admission that the speaker had been wrong in their fundamental assessment. Not of a situation, but of themselves. Rail looked at Brix for a moment. Then he nodded once. That was all. Brix gave a short nod back, turned, and walked away. Sola said quietly, "He will not bother you again." "I know," Rail said. He watched Brix go and then looked away. After the ceremony, Rail went back to his bunk and sat at the small desk. He opened a message window and typed a note to his sister in New Carthage. He did not write about the fight. He did not write about the ravine or the form on his desk or the commander with the still face and the careful words. That he wrote that the galaxy was bigger than he had expected and stranger, and that he had found out a few things about it that he would tell her about someday when they were sitting down somewhere warm. He wrote that he had made some friends. A 4-armed insect who thought too much and always had questions. An old soldier who gave promotions without saying so. Another human who was learning to stop looking the other way. He paused. Then he added, The food here is not good, but the sky from the upper deck is something. You would like it. Come visit when I have a place to visit. He sent it. Then he picked up Commander Zola's form from the desk, read through it one more time, and signed his name at the bottom. Outside the window, the orbital lights of the Academy moved in their slow cycle. Other stations and ships drifted past in the far distance, each one carrying its own weight of species and history and things the galaxy had not yet learned about itself. There was a lot of ground still to cover. Rael turned off the desk light and went to sleep.